I turned the parcel over in my hands, my name on the delivery label, but the recipient's name stopped me cold, Daniel J. And the sender? Lauren. My wife. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a sleek black box. I lifted the lid, revealing an expensive watch, and a handwritten note. Her handwriting was unmistakable. Daniel, I can't stop thinking about you. Hope this makes you smile. Lauren. My stomach dropped. The note slipped from my fingers. My world wasn't what I thought it was. But to understand how I got here, we have to go back to the beginning. Lauren and I had been married for 7 years. 7 years of what I thought was a rock-solid partnership. We met in college, fell in love fast, and built a life together that, by most standards, was enviable. We both had stable careers. She worked as a project manager for a tech company, while I managed a local accounting firm. Our home, a cozy 2-story house in a quiet suburb, was a testament to years of shared dreams and hard work. From the outside, we seemed like the perfect couple. Date nights every other Friday, vacations twice a year, and a circle of friends who often remarked on how well we complemented each other. I'll admit I took pride in being that couple everyone else envied. But perfection is a fragile thing, and sometimes cracks start to form long before you notice them. Looking back, the first sign was subtle, so subtle I didn't even register it at the time. Lauren had started working longer hours, coming home later than usual. She blamed it on a new project her team was handling. You wouldn't believe the amount of coordination this client needs, she'd said one evening, kicking off her heels as she walked through the door. It's exhausting. I didn't question it. Why would I? Lauren had always been ambitious, and her job often demanded a lot from her. Besides, I trusted her implicitly. If she said she was busy, I believed her. But then there were other changes, little things that, in hindsight, feel glaring. She started dressing up more for work. I remember teasing her one morning as she stood in front of the mirror, carefully applying lipstick. What's the occasion? Big meeting? I asked, grinning. She laughed, brushing me off. Just trying to look professional. You know how it is. I didn't know how it was, but I didn't press her. Why would I? She was my wife. There were other moments, too, moments that should have made me pause. Like how she started guarding her phone more closely. She'd always been casual about leaving it lying around, but suddenly, it was either in her hand or face down on the table. Work stuff, she said when I asked about it once. You wouldn't want to see my endless emails. Then there were the weekends. Lauren had always been a homebody, someone who preferred Netflix marathons to nights out. But over the past few months, she'd started going out more, claiming she needed to clear her head, or catch up with friends. Sometimes she'd be gone for hours, coming home with vague stories about who she'd seen or what they talked about. I'd tease her about it, jokingly asking if she had a secret double life. She'd laugh and call me ridiculous, but there was always a slight edge to her tone, a defensiveness I couldn't quite place. Despite all this, I didn't let my mind wander to darker possibilities. I chalked up the changes to stress, maybe even a bit of a midlife crisis. We were both in our mid-30s, after all. People go through phases. I figured it was just a rough patch, something we'd work through together. But the distance between us grew. Conversations that used to flow easily felt strained. She'd snap at me over trivial things, then apologize a little too quickly, as if trying to erase the moment. Intimacy, both physical and emotional, dwindled. Nights that used to end with us curled up together now ended with her scrolling through her phone, while I lay awake, wondering when things had started to change. I even brought it up once, cautiously, over dinner. Is everything okay with us? I asked, my voice tentative. She looked up from her plate, her expression unreadable. What do you mean? I don't know, I said, shrugging. You just seem distant lately. Like you're preoccupied or something. She sighed, putting down her fork. Eric, I'm fine. It's just work. You know how demanding it is. Don't read too much into it. I wanted to believe her, so I did. I told myself that every couple goes through ups and downs, that we were no exception. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. Still, I tried to be the supportive husband. I encouraged her to take time for herself, to focus on what made her happy. I even suggested we plan a getaway, just the two of us, to reconnect. Maybe in a few months, she'd said, brushing off the idea. Work is just too crazy right now. And so, life went on. We continued our routines, our schedules intertwining but never quite meeting. I convinced myself that the tension was temporary, that things would eventually go back to the way they were. I had no idea how wrong I was. If I'd been paying closer attention, maybe I would have seen the truth sooner. Maybe I would have asked more questions, dug a little deeper. But I didn't. I trusted her. I loved her. And that trust, that love, blinded me to the reality that was about to shatter everything I thought I knew about our life together. Little did I know, the cracks in our marriage weren't just cracks. They were fault lines, waiting for the right moment to split wide open. And that moment would come in the form of a simple delivery. I couldn't keep the act up for long. Pretending everything was fine while the weight of Lauren's betrayal pressed down on me was unbearable. For 2 days, I carried the knowledge like a secret poison, my every interaction with her tainted by suspicion and anger. But I needed to confront her. I needed answers. The moment came on a Sunday evening. We were sitting in the living room, the TV playing some mindless reality show she loved. I wasn't watching. My mind was racing, replaying the evidence over and over. The watch, the note, the credit card charges, and Daniel's name in her call log. It was all too much. "Lauren," I said, breaking the silence. She glanced at me, her expression calm, even slightly annoyed at being interrupted. "Yeah?" I hesitated for a moment, trying to find the right words. But there were no right words for this. "Who's Daniel?" Her reaction was subtle, but I caught it. The slight widening of her eyes, the way her body tensed for just a fraction of a second before she quickly composed herself. "Daniel?" she repeated, her tone light, almost dismissive. "I don't know what you're talking about." I pulled the package out from behind the couch where I'd hidden it earlier. Her eyes locked onto it, and I saw the flicker of recognition before she forced a confused smile. "This," I said, setting it on the coffee table between us. "It's addressed to Daniel. From you." Her face flushed. "Eric, I can explain." "Then explain," I snapped, cutting her off. My voice was sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. I was done playing games. She hesitated, her eyes darting between me and the package. "It's not what you think," she said finally. "Daniel he's a co-worker. He's been going through a rough time, and I wanted to do something nice for him. That's all." I laughed bitterly. "A co-worker? You don't sign a note to a co-worker with, 'I can't stop thinking about you.'" She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, she stood abruptly, pacing the room. "You're overreacting," she said, her voice defensive. "You always do this, Eric. You make something out of nothing." "Nothing?" I said, standing to face her. "You call buying an expensive watch for another man and writing him a love note nothing? Because it sure as hell doesn't look like nothing to me." Her defensiveness only grew. "You're being ridiculous. Daniel and I are just friends. I was trying to cheer him up because he's been going through a divorce. That's all. Do you think I'm stupid?" I asked, my voice rising. "I've seen the charges on our credit card. I've seen his name in your call log. How long has this been going on, Lauren?" She stopped pacing and turned to face me, her expression shifting from defensive to angry. "You went through my phone? My accounts? That's a complete violation of my privacy, Eric." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Privacy? Are you seriously trying to make this about me invading your privacy when you're the one sneaking around behind my back?" Her face twisted into a sneer. "You're paranoid. That's always been your problem. You can't handle the idea that I have a life outside of you." I was stunned. The woman standing in front of me, lashing out with venom, didn't feel like the Lauren I'd married. "So what is it then? Are you going to stand there and tell me nothing's happened between you and Daniel? She hesitated again, her anger giving way to something else, guilt. But just as quickly she masked it. I've already told you, she said coldly. There's nothing going on. If you don't believe me, that's your problem. Her words felt like a slap. She wasn't even trying to salvage the situation, to reassure me. Instead, she was doubling down, twisting the knife deeper. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Lauren, I'm giving you one last chance to tell me the truth. If you can't, or won't, then I don't know how we can move forward from this. She crossed her arms, her expression defiant. I've already told you the truth. If you want to blow this out of proportion, that's on you. Her refusal to admit anything, to even show a shred of remorse, was the final straw. I felt something inside me break, the last remnants of trust and hope shattering into pieces. Fine, I said, my voice cold and steady. If that's how you want to play it, then we're done here. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't respond. She just stood there, watching as I grabbed my coat and keys. Where are you going? She asked, her voice laced with a mixture of panic and anger. Anywhere but here, I said, walking out the door. As I drove aimlessly through the night, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. The woman I'd built my life with, the woman I'd trusted completely, had betrayed me, and she couldn't even own up to it. I didn't know what my next move would be, but one thing was certain, there was no going back to the way things were. The Lauren I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. And the life we'd built together felt like a cruel joke, a lie I'd been too blind to see. For the first time in years, I felt completely and utterly alone. I drove for hours that night, the city lights blurring past as my mind replayed the confrontation over and over. The anger, the defensiveness, the sheer audacity of her denial, it was all too much. I didn't have a destination in mind, just an overwhelming need to escape. When I finally pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, it was well past midnight. The place was nearly empty, save for a few truckers nursing cups of coffee. I ordered a black coffee I didn't want and sat at a corner booth, staring out the window as my emotions churned. Shock. Anger. Betrayal. They came in waves, each one stronger than the last. How could she do this to me? To us? We'd been together for nearly a decade. We built a life, a home, shared dreams and plans for the future. And now, all of it felt like a lie. I thought about the moments we'd shared, the holidays, the late-night conversations, the quiet mornings spent in bed. Had any of it been real? And Daniel? Who the hell was he? What did he have that I didn't? Was he better looking? Smarter? Richer? The questions gnawed at me, feeding my insecurities. I hated myself for even going there, for letting someone like him take up space in my mind. But the worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was her reaction. The way she refused to take responsibility, to even acknowledge the pain she'd caused. The way she tried to turn it back on me, as if I were the one in the wrong. I pulled out my phone, staring at her number. Part of me wanted to call her, to demand answers, to scream and cry and beg for an explanation. But I knew it wouldn't change anything. She'd just deny, deflect and lie some more. Instead, I texted my best friend, Mark. You up? His reply came almost instantly. Yeah. What's up? I hesitated for a moment, then typed out a response. Lauren's cheating on me. There was a long pause before his next message came through. What? Are you sure? I'm sure. Found a package she sent to some guy named Daniel. A watch. With a note. Checked her phone, her credit card statements. It's all there. Another pause. Jesus, man. I'm so sorry. Where are you? Some diner. Needed to get out of the house. Want me to come meet you? I thought about it for a moment, then replied. No. Just needed to tell someone. Mark's messages were kind, supportive, the kind of thing a good friend would say in a moment like this. But they didn't make me feel any better. Nothing could. By the time I got home, It was nearly 3 a.m. The house was dark, silent. Lauren was asleep, or at least pretending to be, in our bed. I didn't bother going upstairs. Instead, I grabbed a blanket and crashed on the couch, too exhausted to think anymore. The next few days were a blur. I went through the motions at work, but my mind was elsewhere. Every time my phone buzzed with a text from Lauren, I felt a surge of anger and sadness. She'd send messages like, "Can we talk?" or, "You're blowing this out of proportion." But I couldn't bring myself to respond. At night I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything over and over. I'd think about the good times, the promises we'd made, and wonder where it had all gone wrong. Was it me? Had I been a bad husband? Neglectful? Unloving? I started questioning everything about myself, about our marriage. The doubt was suffocating. But as the days turned into weeks, something shifted. The initial shock and sadness began to give way to anger, not just at Lauren, but at myself. How had I let this happen? How had I ignored the signs for so long? I started going for long runs after work, pounding the pavement until my legs burned and my lungs ached. It was the only thing that seemed to quiet the storm in my head. I'd come home drenched in sweat, too tired to think, and collapse onto the couch. I also started talking to people, Mark, my sister, even a coworker I barely knew but who'd gone through a messy divorce herself. Their support was a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't as alone as I felt. Still, the pain lingered. Some days, it felt like a dull ache, a constant reminder of what I'd lost. Other days, it hit me like a freight train, knocking the wind out of me when I least expected it. One night, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. There we were, smiling and happy, at our wedding, on vacations, at family gatherings. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, to erase every trace of her from my life. But I couldn't. Those moments had been real, even if they felt like a cruel joke now. I started seeing a therapist, something I never thought I'd do. At first, it felt strange, sitting in a room with a stranger and pouring out my soul. But over time, it helped. She helped me understand that Lauren's actions weren't about me, that her betrayal wasn't a reflection of my worth. It was a slow process, but I began to feel the tiniest glimmers of hope. Hope that I could get through this, that I could rebuild my life, even if it didn't look the way I'd imagined. But one thing was certain: the man who'd walked into that diner, shattered and lost, wasn't the same man walking out of this mess. I was stronger now, sharper, more aware of my own value. And while the scars of Lauren's betrayal would always be there, I was determined not to let them define me. The decision wasn't easy, but in the end, it was unavoidable. The life I thought I'd been building with Lauren was over, shattered by her betrayal and her refusal to take responsibility. There was no coming back from this. After weeks of silence, we finally sat down to have the conversation. I wasn't expecting much, but I needed to say my piece, to lay it all out so I could walk away without regrets. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her arms crossed, her face a mask of defiance. It was a far cry from the tearful apologies or heartfelt confessions I'd once hoped for. But by this point, I wasn't surprised. "I've been thinking a lot," I began, my voice steady but firm. "About us, about everything that's happened." She said nothing, just stared at me with that same unreadable expression. "I can't do this anymore, Lauren," I continued. "I can't be in a marriage where there's no trust, no honesty. What you did, what you've been doing, it's destroyed everything we had. And the fact that you can't even admit it. I don't see how we can move forward." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. Instead, she looked down at the table, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the wood. "I want a divorce," I said, the words hanging heavy in the air. She finally looked up, her eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You're really going to throw everything away over one mistake?" "One mistake?" I repeated, my voice rising. "This wasn't a mistake, Lauren. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk on the way home. What you did was deliberate. You lied to me, over and over again. You betrayed me. She opened her mouth to respond but stopped herself, her expression shifting to something that almost resembled guilt. But it was too little, too late. "I've already contacted a lawyer," I said, my tone cold. "We'll work out the details, but I want this to be as quick and clean as possible. I don't want to drag this out any longer than it needs to be." She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms again. "Fine," she said after a long pause. "If that's what you want." Her indifference stung, but it also solidified my decision. There was no point in trying to salvage something that was already broken beyond repair. Over the next few weeks, the process began. Splitting up our assets, deciding who would keep what, untangling the life we'd spent years building together. It was messy, painful, and exhausting, but it was also liberating in a strange way. Lauren moved out of the house first, taking her things and leaving behind a silence that was both deafening and peaceful. For the first time in years, the space felt like mine, free of her presence, her lies, her betrayal. I threw myself into rebuilding my life. I focused on work, spent more time with friends and family, and continued seeing my therapist. Slowly but surely, I began to find a sense of stability, a sense of self that had been buried under the weight of our failing marriage. Lauren and I spoke only when necessary, mostly through lawyers. The few times we did interact, she seemed distant, almost resigned. I wondered if she regretted what she'd done, if she ever thought about what she'd lost. But in the end, it didn't matter. Her feelings were no longer my concern. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. I walked out of the courthouse that day feeling lighter than I had in years. It wasn't the ending I'd envisioned when we said our vows, but it was the one I needed. Looking back, I realized that leaving Lauren wasn't just about escaping her betrayal. It was about choosing myself, my happiness, my peace of mind, my future. I moved into a smaller house on the other side of town, one that felt more like a fresh start than a continuation of the life I'd left behind. I redecorated, filling the space with things that brought me joy rather than memories of a broken marriage. It wasn't easy, but I knew I'd made the right decision. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Lauren's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been a wake-up call. It forced me to confront truths I'd been avoiding, to reevaluate what I wanted from life and from a partner. And while the pain of her actions would always be a part of my story, it didn't define me. I was ready to move forward, to rebuild, to find happiness again, on my own terms. It's been a year since the divorce, and life has a funny way of moving forward, even when it feels like the world is crumbling around you. The person I was back then, the man who found that parcel, who confronted Lauren, who spent sleepless nights questioning everything, feels like a distant memory. I won't lie and say it's been easy. Healing from something like this is a process, one that doesn't have a clear endpoint. There are still moments when I catch myself replaying the past, wondering how things might have been different if I'd noticed the signs sooner, or if Lauren had made different choices. But those moments are fewer now, and they don't hold the same power over me. The biggest lesson I've learned through all of this is the importance of self-worth. For years, I poured everything I had into my marriage, believing that love and effort were enough to sustain it. But love isn't enough when it's one-sided, when trust is shattered, and when respect is absent. I've also learned to let go of the what-ifs. They're a trap, a spiral that leads nowhere. What happened, happened. I can't change it, and I can't control Lauren's actions. All I can do is control how I respond, how I rebuild, and how I move forward. One of the most surprising things to come out of this ordeal has been the relationships I built along the way. My bond with friends and family has deepened in ways I never expected. People I hadn't spoken to in years reached out when they heard what happened, offering support and a listening ear. Even Mark, who's always been more of a guy's guy, has become someone I can open up to without fear of judgment. And then there's me. I've rediscovered parts of myself that I'd forgotten in the chaos of marriage. I've taken up new hobbies, traveled to places I'd always wanted to visit, and embraced the freedom of being on my own. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm living for myself, not for someone else's expectations. If I could offer advice to anyone going through something similar, it would be this: trust your instincts. If something feels off, don't ignore it. And if you find yourself in a situation where your worth is being diminished, don't be afraid to walk away. It's not easy, and it's not quick, but you deserve better than a life built on lies. Looking back, I don't regret confronting Lauren or ending our marriage. It was painful, yes, but it was also necessary. Sometimes, the hardest choices are the ones that lead to the most growth. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in a long time, I'm excited to find out. And that, I think, is the greatest victory of all. Leave a comment with your thoughts on the story. And subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new interesting stories. See you soon.